be talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to connect.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Thursday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody is having a great day. And I'll say this, we are starting to get to a little bit of a slower time on the calendar. Obviously, on Monday's show, we reacted to the Dan Hurley news. Tuesday, we did some kind of news and notes from what I missed while I was gone. But we are officially in the doldrums of the summer. But guess what? We are going to make it work. That is what we do on this show. And I'll say for a Thursday in June, sure does feel like we've got ourselves a lot to talk about. Here's what you need to know about today's show. We're going to open. Dan Hurley has his little media tour throughout the day, does Cowherd, does Levitard, does a press conference, talks a lot about the situation with the Lakers. I want to dive in. I had some of you send me the quotes, separate fact from fiction, because obviously I was the guy that pretty much from the beginning said I didn't really believe that it was really ever going to happen. Well, we'll discuss everything Dan Hurley had to say over the course of the day. From there, we will talk about the ACC-SEC basketball challenge. Okay, John Rothstein broke the story, all the games yesterday on Wednesday. Let me tell you, ESPN must hate you as a basketball fan because those matchups are terrible, with the exception of maybe a Bama UNC and, of course, producer Matt's Auburn Tigers going to Cameron Indoor. He's already asked me for the whole week off. It seems kind of weird that you need the whole week for one game. But anyway, we'll talk about that. We will talk about this interesting story today that developed, the Big 12 trying to sell their naming rights. You know, Torres has some thoughts on that. And we will wrap. How about this? We're going to bring back probably the most popular segment we do on this show. We haven't done it in months because there's just been so much news going on. But Aaron Right, Aaron Wrong, the best and worst takes of the week. Oh, it's back, baby. And you better believe that while I got a lot of stuff right, you already know I got a lot of stuff wrong. So I'm going to dive in a minute. Before we do, quick reminder, couple things. Make sure you're always subscribed to this YouTube channel. That way you know when we're going live every single week. Probably no Sunday night show this week with Father's Day. By the way, happy early Father's Day to all the dads out there, including my own. And oh, by the way, we'll be back. Anyway, normal week next week. The point is, make sure you're subscribed so you always know when we're going live. And of course, make sure you're subscribed on Apple, Spotify. If you want to do your boy Torres, leave a favor, leave a 5-star rating and review. And I'll also say, as we hit a little bit of a slower part of the calendar, you can always feel free to send me a question or a comment. Aaron Torres Podcast questions @gmail.com if there's a topic or something that you would be interested in discussing. So with that said, there is no more time to waste. It's a Thursday night in June, Friday, when many of you are listening on podcast. No more time to waste. And let's get to the topic of the day. So the topic of the day, bluntly, listen, again, there's not a ton going on in sports, but we did get sort of the trickle-down follow-up from the story of this time last week, which was Dan Hurley meeting with the Lakers and ultimately turning down the Los Angeles Lakers and their coaching opportunity. We had not heard from Dan Hurley. As we know, he went out recruiting immediately after turning the Lakers down on Monday. The big NBPA Top 100 camp was Tuesday, Wednesday, so he was there. But on Thursday, he did a media tour where he was basically pretty much, if there was a camera, he was there talking, explaining his whole situation. He went on with Dan Levitard. He went on with Colin Cowherd, did a long-form sit-down with Matt Norlander. And actually, right before we went live on air here, did do a press conference for the local media in Connecticut where he answered a lot of questions. He said a lot of things, and there certainly were some interesting things that were said. And let me tell you, you know how I know they were interesting? because a ton of you sent them to me and said, Torres, you told us that there was no chance he was ever leaving, blah, 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 blah. Well, if you read this quote or that quote or whatever, you were clearly wrong. Well, let's get into some of the stuff that Dan Hurley said, the stuff that I did find interesting. But before we do, really quickly, let's go back to what I said about this whole situation from the beginning, okay? I actually, knowing that we were going to address this today, went back and listened to my Thursday show last week when the news first broke. Now, granted, it was about 12 hours after the news broke. I had been traveling. I was in Mexico. I came back, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But the genesis of what I said was this, is I said that I believed with about 85% certainty. I said, I don't really think this is much of a story. I don't think Dan Hurley is leaving. And it was for all the reasons we talked about. I don't really think he wants to coach LeBron James. I don't think he wants to draft Bronny. And then there were some other holes in the story that, in my opinion, didn't make sense about the Lakers' pursuit. And ultimately, what I said was this. I think that it was largely to get his deal done at UConn. It gives the Lakers an out to say that we did a real coaching search before we hired JJ Redick. But I did say on last Thursday's show, I said, listen, it's not, I don't think he's leaving for the Lakers, but it's not a 0% chance either that he's 100% coming back. And I went back and listened on Thursday's show. I put it at about 15%. I said about 15% chance he goes, 85% chance he stays. Obviously he does, but it leads to kind of the quote that was probably the most viral quote from the entire day. It came from the Dan Le Batard show. And listen, by the way, Dan Hurley certainly has, his perspective on everything that happened, but it did feel like he was trying to set the tone for the day and for, how he views what happened over the last couple of days. And so the first thing he did was kind of rip apart not only a narrative that I have kind of pushed, but I think there's a lot of people in the media that have kind of pushed this narrative that it was only about a contract extension. He was never taking the Lakers job. And it was interesting to see after he turned down the job, the next day he's on the road recruiting, it felt like pretty much everybody said that he basically used the Lakers to get his deal done at UConn. And so Dan Hurley to Dan Le Batard, this was kind of the quote that caught everyone's attention early. Direct quote from Dan Hurley. You can find the quote pretty much anywhere. He said, one of the worst takes I've heard is that this is a leverage play by me to improve my situation at UConn. I don't need leverage here. We've won back-to-back national championships at this place. This was never a leverage situation for me. So that was really the quote that probably got sent to me 20 or 30 times via DM, via tag, via Instagram, via Twitter, via text message, whatever. Torres, you said it was all about leverage, and he said that you're an idiot for even suggesting it. Well, first of all, I never suggested it was solely about leverage. As I said, it was about 15%. But whenever anybody said that to me, you know what my first response was? Let me ask you a question. In any negotiation, pretty much anywhere, could be sports, life, business, podcasting, whatever. Has anyone ever used another job offer as leverage and then ultimately admitted, yeah, that was solely for leverage? Like if your favorite baseball player, let's say he's a member of the San Francisco Giants, and he's not happy with his contract, and he has a meeting with the Braves, and he has a meeting with the Dodgers, and then he decides to come back to San Francisco. You've never heard a baseball player or a football player or a basketball coach or baseball manager, whatever, say, yeah, you know what? I did use that for leverage. I was never taking that job. I was never taking that offer. No, everyone in every walk of life uses stuff for leverage. I mean, I'll be honest, we're in the middle of, negotiating, advertisers and things like that for the fall. Like, you don't think it's better for me? Let's just say, this is a hypothetical, it's not true, but let's say Bud Light wants to be the official beer sponsor of this show. You don't think it's good for me to also have an offer from Coors Light on the table? Of course it is. So like this idea that because he said it wasn't a leverage play, that's 100% true, doesn't really make sense. But beyond that, here's the other thing that I find interesting. All of the people that sent me that article, I just have one question for you. Did you read literally the next quote from Dan Hurley immediately following that? Because if you read quite literally the next quote from Dan Hurley, he kind of admits that, yeah, it kind of was a leverage ploy. Here is the quote immediately following. He says, one of the worst takes I've ever heard is that it was a leverage play. Here's what he said immediately after that, though. He said, I've had a contract in place for a couple weeks, and the final part in terms of salary has been done for a while. There are some other parts like NIL and the staff salary and some different things that I want adjusted and I'm not comfortable with. But the sense of the idea that this was some conspiracy to get me a sweeter deal at UConn is just that. It's lazy. Okay, listen, I love Coach Hurley. Brought 2 national championships to my alma mater. But he just said it's not a leverage play, but he just admitted that it is a leverage play, that he isn't happy with where things are with NIL, with some of his staff salaries. And what was funny was, if you went back and listened to my Monday show, when he did officially turn down the job, this was something that we actually talked about on the show as well. I said my sources in stores basically told me that essentially, that they told me that that when everything was said and done, when the new deal was in place, what my sources in stores told me was that his salary wasn't going to look fundamentally different than what was projected. In other words, he wasn't going to go from 5.5 to 13 million or anything like that. But what I said on the show on Monday was exactly that. I said the salary is not going to be significantly different, maybe a couple more zeros at the end, but it's not going to be anything crazy. He's not going to triple his salary or anything like that. But what it will do is set up his assistants, set up NIL. And the exact quote, and I know it that I said because producer Matt made it into a clip that we put on our Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, is what I said was, Dan Hurley, ultimately what he wanted out of this whole situation, from my understanding, was basically what I said at the time, which is it wasn't about being the highest paid coach, although, he says he will be. That part I cannot confirm or deny. But what I said at the time was what he wants is essentially assurances that UConn will operate as the biggest and best program in college basketball. Again, we talked about this. Remember, we are entering in just a couple days, literally, a Big Ten and SEC world. Texas and Oklahoma go to the SEC on midnight, January 30th, and Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA do the same. So come July 1st, 90% of the power, 90% of the money, 90 is a hypothetical, but you get the point. The vast majority of the money and power is going to be in those 2 leagues. And so what Dan Hurley basically wants to say is, I don't want to wake up one day in a year or 2 and every SEC school, every Big Ten school, Oregon, Kentucky, Washington, Tennessee, whatever, they're just doing stuff that we can't do. And so I said from the beginning, this was a leverage. It was a leverage play, but it wasn't about being the highest paid coach. It was about making sure things in the program were done at the highest level possible, which is what I believe are going to be the case. Let's get to some of the other quotes that I found interesting. Now, I will say this one I did find very interesting. Dan Hurley was asked by Dan Le Batard, or one of his crew, whatever, if there was a number that would have convinced him to leave UConn for the Lakers. And he said, to leave, yeah, there was probably a number. To leave a place at any moment in your life, to say that it's not a motivating factor, the finances to leave a place is definitely a thing. And I found that interesting as well, because that was one thing that you kind of heard from the NBA side of things, from the NBA reporters. I think even the NBA reporters that cover the Lakers and that know that it's kind of a, let's call it what it is, what I've been calling it all week, a little bit of a poverty brand, that essentially even they were surprised. Like, you want Dan Hurley. You know that if he goes back to UConn, he's probably making 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9. And you only offer him $11 million a year. Now, 6 years, $70 million is great for 99% of society. But if you want to take a guy out of a great job, you know what you have to do? You have to blow him away with a number. And so I found that part interesting as well. One, I think it speaks to the Lakers. I think it speaks to some of the stuff that I said last week. I think they were interested in Dan Hurley. But I also think that, listen, if Dan Hurley was the guy that they wanted, I think they could have done a much better job of convincing him than they did. Is that because they really want JJ Redick? Is that because they wanted Redick all along? Is it because they wanted to show that they're doing a real search and that JJ Redick isn't the only candidate and hasn't been the only candidate since day one? Is it because maybe JJ Redick was getting cold feet and they needed to let him know that they had other options? Whatever the case, the number was not impressive. And I thought that was interesting from Dan Hurley, where he did say, look, there's a number that's going to make me think about it, but probably not the number that they offered. To me, that's interesting for a couple reasons. One, he did say throughout the day, can't promise that I'm going to be at UConn forever. He was asked that question at his press availability, and he just basically said, no, that's not something I could promise. You never know where you're going to be in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. It's just not something that you know. And so I found that part interesting as well. But what I was also thinking was this, like, if you are one of these owners with a crap ton of money, Mark Cuban's probably a bad example because one, I don't think he even fully owns the team anymore. But two, on top of that, he also, is in the NBA finals. So I don't think he's in search of a new head coach. But what I would say is if you're let's use an example, Steve Ballmer. We all know he's got a ton of money, Los Angeles Clippers. He's in LA. And the question obviously becomes, what happens if it falls apart again next year? James Harden, Russell Westbrook, whatever. Well, Dan Hurley just admitted, yeah, there is a number that would have made me have to at least heavily think about it. But I didn't get that number from the Lakers. And if I was one of those other 29 owners, and I was one of those other 29 owners that had real money, that the money isn't tied into the organization like it is in the Lakers, that'd be something I'd file away. Because if I'm Steve Ballmer and money's no objective to me, I just hand Dan Hurley a blank check. If I'm Mark Cuban, if I'm whoever, fill in the blank, Mickey Arison, and Pat Riley in Miami, although I'm pretty sure Spo is going to have that job for a while. The point being that it does feel like there is a number that he has to at least consider. I found that part interesting as well. Couple other things, one, on Monday, we did talk about, or on last Thursday, we did talk about what I believe to be a little bit of a loyalty factor is that, look, I don't think the timing of this situation was perfect either. Good jobs open in April. Good jobs open in May. And I believe if the Lakers had prioritized Dan Hurley on May 5th, the day after they hired Darvin Ham, they maybe make it a bit more likely. But remember, like we talked about, Alex Karaban is a star player, one of Dan Hurley's earlier recruits, entering his fourth year, been part of back-to-back national championships, and at the end of the NBA draft process, decided to come back to college. And I said, this might sound stupid, but I said, I think Alex Karaban is probably a reason that he considers staying because Alex Karaban believed in him, and to leave Alex Karaban in mid-June without a lot of great options when he bet on you just doesn't feel like the thing that Dan Hurley would do. And so I bring it up because credit Matt Norlander. This was one of the questions he asked. And this is what Dan Hurley said. He said, yeah, that was big. That was big. That was important. And again, I don't know, if he stays in the draft, I'm not sure what that does because some players, the other returners, and then the transfers and the high school guys, the window would open up for them. He's insinuating that, yeah, they could still transfer, but their options would be very limited at this point. This was something we talked about as well, is I think everybody thinks, well, if all those players were available, oh my goodness, it would be a free-for-all. And to some degree it would have been, but to some degree, most rosters are set by this point. And so I think Dan Hurley, that was probably part of the decision as well, is if I leave right now, I'm going to screw over a lot of these kids because some of them are going to have great options. Some of them aren't. And some of them are going to have to stay at UConn and don't know their future. So I found that quote interesting. But the last one I will say, listen, let me say this. Everyone's kind of got their own version of whatever. And I'm not here to accuse anyone of not telling the truth, whatever. The one thing I do disagree with on, though, is Matt Norlander did ask about the Billy Joel concert. And he, credit Matt. Listen, I know Matt a little bit. Ironically, I sat next to him at the Arkansas Duke game last year, talked to him obviously for a long time there. But he has some really good follow-up questions in terms of some of the semantics of the whole situation. He asked about not only showing up at the Billy Joel concert, but then also, remember, Luke Murray is an assistant coach who posted a clip from that concert. And Dan Hurley was asked about that. Basically, the insinuation being like, everybody's watching, everybody sees you're there, everybody sees that you're at Madison Square Garden, which they call Store South, which is a place that UConn plays quite often and frankly has dominated in of late. Like, you wouldn't really be at that concert posting videos if you were actually leaving. And Dan Hurley did say this, and this is the only part that I would have kept pressing him, because this part I find a little bit hard to believe. He said, "No, I was completely undecided. We were just taking a mental break. We didn't even think about or talk about it over on the Uber to the Madison Square Garden. I think we were so stressed. I'm not complaining because I love every second of it, but you go until the season ends." And then he goes on and on. I think my wife posted whatever, but he did say this part. He goes, and you get to a night where you've had a couple beers and you're at the concert, you've got great seats and you're just having fun and you're probably not thinking about the ramifications. That was the only quote that I saw that I was like, I don't know if I believe that. And it's not because I'm calling Dan Hurley a liar. And Dan Hurley's, he's not a liar as far as I'm concerned, but it's actually the opposite. I think he's way too smart, and I think he understands social media way too much to know the ramifications of that situation. Like, in other words, let me say this. Maybe he was somewhat on the fence, but I do think that he understands that it's not only his fans. Forget the fans, forget people sitting at home, whatever. His players are also sitting there on social media. 18, 21-year-old kids, even more so than me or you or whatever. They're on their phones all day, every day. So if they go and they see you at a concert having the time of your life, and then 24 hours later you tell them, I'm out, like, that is going to scar some kids that had a lot of trust in you. And so I've said from the beginning, Dan Hurley's left jobs for other jobs, whether it's high school to Wagner to Rhode Island to UConn. And there's probably a day where he's going to leave UConn for another job, probably in the NBA, almost certainly in the NBA. And, we could talk about where it would be if those jobs open up. But I just bring it up because that was the one part I didn't believe. It's like, I think if it was 75-25 that he was staying, then yeah, you go to the concert and have a good time. But if it's 25-75 and you're almost positive that you have to have the toughest conversation in your life, or one of the 4 toughest conversations in your life, I just don't buy that he would be at the concert having a good time, and certainly not letting Luke Murray post about it. And I'd add as well, from Luke Murray's perspective, like, he's a guy that's about my age. And let me tell you, I was on 2 or 3 group chats when that whole thing was going on. And I think he would get to, like, if we're on our way out, or if coach thinks he's on his way out, let's just, if somebody catches us in the crowd, that's one thing, but let's not post a picture of us having the time of our lives. Let's just enjoy the concert. I'm not putting anything on social media, whatever. That was just about the only part that I kind of was just like, Coach, I love you. Not totally sure that I believe that, though, but whatever. There was some other interesting stuff, but those to me were the big ones. Like, everyone said, oh, Torres, he said that it wasn't a leverage play. It's like, well, no one has ever claimed it was a leverage play after the fact, but we kind of know what it was. And so I'm certainly happy that Dan Hurley is back at UConn. I'm certainly happy that he's back in college basketball. But I still largely stand by what I've said from the beginning, is I think, listen, we talked about it on Thursday's show. When the Lakers call, you got to at least take it. As my buddy who listens to this show said, it's like Entourage, right? We've all watched Entourage. Ari Gold, Vince, take the meeting. I don't care if you don't think you're going to do the job or not. You don't want to play Aquaman. Who cares? Take the meeting. You don't know what they're going to say. So I think he was going to take the meeting, but I said 10 to 15% on Thursday's show. It ended up being the case. Happy he's back. Great for college basketball. Certainly great for UConn. But let me also be fair as well and say that just because he's back this year, now kind of the cat's out of the bag. Now NBA teams know that if you come at him right, there is an interest there. So do I think he's going to take the Portland Trailblazers or the Orlando Magic Probably not. But I think if the right opportunity comes, I think there will be a day where probably, as I said on last Thursday's show, Torres is going to have a tough conversation, get on that mic and really, not have a very fun conversation, because I do suspect there will be a day where Dan Hurley leaves, but thankfully it isn't today. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Make sure to drop your questions in. We will get to them coming up. But what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. ACC-SEC challenge. I know it's not the biggest story in sports. This was butchered by ESPN. What was ESPN doing with some of these matchups? We're going to come back, talk about the matchups. Quick break. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what. Do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more. All available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. More Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. I am back. Gonna be back. So do want to switch gears. Let me send out a tweet here really quick. All right. As I was saying, let me do that over. All right, everybody. I'm back. Gonna be back. So do want to switch gears. Was a little bit of college hoops news from the week that we did not get to on the last show that I at least just want to discuss a tiny bit. It comes from the lovely world of college basketball, where for the second year in a row, we have ourselves the ACC-SEC Challenge. Okay, and for people who forgot, we used to have the ACC Big Ten Challenge. Then ESPN, which this is an ESPN event, they stopped broadcasting the Big Ten. So they're like, we're not promoting Purdue and Iowa and Indiana. And so they turned it into the ACC-SEC Challenge a year ago. Thought year one went pretty well. We got some good games. We got Duke at Arkansas, a game that I was at. Woo Pig Suey. I saw him call the Hogs, baby. Woo. I saw him call the Hogs. It was actually really fun to see the Hog call in person. But there was that one. There was obviously North Carolina hosting Tennessee. Wild game there. Kentucky against Miami. Miami was, of course, coming off a Final Four. So the tone was really set. Thought overall it was a pretty fun event. Well, we're in year two. And earlier in the week, John Rothstein was the first one with the actual games. We got the schedule. And let me just say this. PU, this schedule stinks. ESPN, what are you doing? What are you doing, ESPN? This schedule is brutal. And I want to go ahead and dive in. And I want to go ahead and talk. But most importantly, I want to do the work of ESPN, because it took me about 3 minutes to come up with 3 very high-profile games that I think would have everyone interested in college hoops in December at a time when college hoops is struggling for eyeballs, but really struggling to set the narrative for the sport itself. And so let's talk a little bit about this. And before we do, let me give a couple quick caveats. Listen, this is not a perfect system. It's not easy. And there's a couple reasons some of the games worked out the way they did. By the way, I should reference some of the big ones. So one, obviously, John Calipari, first year at Arkansas. Oh my goodness, Coach Cal, whether you like him, whether you hate him, he himself is a huge brand. So we're going to put him in a big game, right? We're going to send him somewhere marquee, right? They're going to play at Miami. Miami's going to be terrible next year, okay? And while it's great for Coach Cal, he's going to get a nice little suntan. Is that the best you can do? By the way, Kentucky, Mark Pope, year one. Remember, these games are in early December. The season starts in November. So we'll see Mark Pope in Kentucky in the Champions Classic against Duke. But there are a lot of different intriguing games that you can play even if Duke is already on the schedule. Kentucky ended up at Clemson. What? Do not say, you know what? You know how they say sign me up for that? Whatever the opposite of sign me up for that is the opposite. Get me a subscription to the Tennis Channel. Get me a subscription to Hulu. I will be watching it, but I'm not going to enjoy it. We had that one. Now, I will say there were a couple other intriguing ones that are legitimately good. Bama is going to UNC. And also, again, we mentioned earlier, producer Matt's Auburn Tigers are going to Duke. So I get it if you're an Auburn fan. I get it if you're an Alabama fan. I get it if you're a North Carolina fan. And I get, by the way, that it's not perfect, that you can't put together the perfect schedule. Again, there are already scheduled games. Duke is already playing Kentucky, so that's off the table. And also, let's just be honest. The ACC right now does not have a ton of super marketable marquee teams and games. And so I get that in a perfect world, you hope Syracuse is better. You hope Louisville is better. You hope Wake Forest is better. I get that they're not going to have 7 teams ranked in the top 25. But again, these games could have been better. And let me just kind of talk through what I would do if I was in charge. Because again, I put together a better schedule in 10 minutes than ESPN did. First of all, let's start with Arkansas really quick. So listen, Coach Cal's there. We know it. And as I said a minute ago, whether you're a Kentucky fan that thinks Cal is overrated, should never coach again, whatever, or you're an Arkansas fan that's like super fired up because you should have a very good team coming into 2024, 2025, no matter where you are on the Cal spectrum, we all kind of acknowledge that he himself is a pretty darn big brand, right? Now you can argue, is he the biggest name in college basketball? Has Dan Hurley surpassed him? Whatever. But he himself is a huge brand. And so the idea that we're sending him to Miami, that's no bueno, unacceptable. And immediately, as soon as I saw this, I thought of two matchups that would have been awesome for Arkansas. The first one, bluntly, is a rematch of last year's SEC-ACC challenge, okay? That was, of course, as I said, Duke was at Arkansas. Arkansas wins. They storm the floor. It was to date the only court storming that I have ever seen or been a part of. Fun fact, that was also the first time we tried to live stream. It didn't go well, mostly because my internet sucked, but it doesn't really change the fact that it was a great atmosphere. So you could replay that game, not just because it's a replay, but because I was thinking about this. The Cal brand is huge. The Duke brand is huge. By the way, the Arkansas brand is huge as well. By the way, it is a rematch of the 1994 National Championship game, so you get a little bit of nostalgia. But I think, what I was thinking about is what I said a minute ago, is the fact that, remember, it's December. Most people aren't paying that close attention to college basketball at that time, and I'll take it even a step further from there. On top of that, Arkansas, because of the nature in which Coach Cal schedules, it's very likely, if not probable, that this is like the first big game on Arkansas's schedule. Coach Cal doesn't do the Maui Invitational, Battle for Atlantis. He doesn't do these multi-team events. And so what better way to introduce the world to Cal at Arkansas than by shoving them right into the middle of Cameron Indoor Arena and having them figure it out? And the thing that I think works out really well in that case is that in the moment of football season, you kind of have a baked in basketball conversation to have out of that game. Like there is a conversation for Stephen A. Smith, who knows nothing about basketball, to have on the day following that game for whoever, Mike Greenberg, whatever. And the conversation is pretty straightforward. If Arkansas loses, which they probably wouldn't be favored because the game's at Duke, well, then it becomes, Coach Cal still can't win the big one. What a bum. He's so bad. They're awful, blah, 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 whatever. And I'm not saying it's fair. I'm just saying that would be the conversation that you have. But then two, what if Arkansas won? Then you could have the, oh my God, Coach Cal, he just went to Cameron Indoor. Is Coach Cal back? Did Coach Cal ever leave? Was it really just time for him to go? Maybe he has more left in the tank than we thought. So to me, you just missed a golden opportunity right there. And I think even if that doesn't work out, and we'll get to some other potential matchups as well, there's another great matchup that you could have placed that would have had very intriguing stakes. How about sending Arkansas to Louisville? One, Louisville, of course, has its own new head coach, Pat Kelsey. We've talked about him. I'm really excited about that Pat Kelsey era. But two, what's at stake there? Coach Cal returning to a building where he might be more hated than even in Rupp Arena. Like, I think he'll get a lot of cheers in Rupp Arena. He'll get some boos too. You send Coach Cal to the Yum Center that first week, then again, it's Coach Cal returns to Louisville, the home of his previous biggest rival. He just won there this past year. What about that? Oh, by the way, you know who Coach Cal's lead assistant is? Kenny Payne, the former Louisville head coach. So to me, those were two just slam dunk no-brainers. What are we doing sending Arkansas to Miami? From there, I'll say, look, the North Carolina-Alabama game is certainly interesting. Now, I think Alabama, it's hard for me to argue that of those two big brands, whether it's Duke, whether it's Carolina, that they shouldn't be playing one of the two. And the reason why is pretty straightforward. It's because if you think about it, if you look at it, Alabama is probably going to be a preseason top 5 team. I'm going to have them at number 1. I think most people voting are going to have them probably in the top 3. And so it's hard for me to complain about UNC, especially because, by the way, Alabama and UNC are low-key, kind of in the middle of like this weird new age rivalry out of nowhere. Remember, Alabama beat North Carolina a few years ago when North Carolina was ranked number 1 in the country. Remember, Alabama last offseason beat North Carolina head-to-head for a Chapel Hill native named Jaron Stevenson. Remember, Alabama beat North Carolina in the Sweet 16 this past year. Remember, Alabama also beat North Carolina for Cliff Omoyori in the transfer portal. So there's this weird thing going on. And if they keep that one, that's cool. I also think, by the way, sending Nate Oates to Bama, to Duke would be pretty funny too, because if you remember, Nate Oates was kind of critical of Coach K a few years ago during the COVID situation. If you remember, he said Coach K was trying to get the season canceled, and Nate Oates was like, well, if he had a good team, would he be trying to get the season canceled? So I think that'd be fun as well. And I could see either one going that way. But the other one to me that just makes no sense is Kentucky-Clemson. I mean, Kentucky-Clemson, that does about as much for me as trying to think of an analogy off the top of my head. It's like going to a steakhouse and ordering a salad with no dressing. Like, what are we doing? And here's the thing. Even if you can't get them with Duke because they play Duke earlier in the year, there's plenty of great games that you could set up. You could set up Carolina. You could set up some other ones as well. And literally any game would be more interesting than Clemson, okay? Notre Dame is a historic rival. Play Notre Dame. That'd be fun. I think seeing Kentucky go to Syracuse, play in that dome would be awesome. Now, Syracuse is technically a road opponent this year. They're both playing on the road, and every team gets a home and home every year. But remember, this is a made-for-TV event. You can flip-flop and then just give the other team back-to-back home games. Like, it doesn't have to be a thing where just because they played at home last year, they're going to have to be on the road this year. It's made for TV. Make it up. Who cares? By the way, Carolina played at home in this event last year. They're playing at home again this year. So it can be done. There's Kentucky against Georgia Tech. Send them to Atlanta. Kentucky has a ton of fans in Atlanta. They call it Catlanta. I think Wake Forest is going to be kind of interesting this year. Haven't played Wake Forest. Sort of a historic team. Heck, how about NC State? NC State at least is coming off of a Final Four. So like this Clemson game, it's just like, what are we even doing? And so I was thinking about it. These would, if I could put together dream matchups, dream scenarios, whatever, this is what I would do. I would start with this. I would start with Kentucky at Carolina. I know they played last year in the CBS Sports Classic, but Kentucky's off the table with Duke for the year. And again, it goes back. First of all, Kentucky's on the road. North Carolina's at home. 2, this is a made-for-TV event where we're trying to get people interested in college hoops. So Kentucky plays Duke in the opening week of the season. They play Gonzaga a few days after this one. You're putting them on TV. You're introducing the world to Mark Pope, and you're giving people something to talk about. Is this Pope guy really good? Is he really bad? Does he know what he's doing? Whatever. From there, I would send Bama to Duke because I do think that Nate Oates is going to have a top 5 team. Duke is a huge brand in its own right, and I think you're building up the Alabama basketball brand as well with Nate Oates. They're coming off a Final Four. Get that guy back on TV in a high-profile game. Obviously, it kind of worked out because they're playing Carolina. And then the third one, I'd send Arkansas to Louisville. I would send Arkansas to Louisville because, in my opinion, Coach Cal returning to the Yum Center, returning to Louisville, returning to the state of Kentucky, that to me is a story. It's not the biggest story in sports. It'll be during football season, but it's not nothing either. Cal versus Miami, Arkansas versus Miami, it feels like a ESPN 6 o'clock local time start. Like it just does. And I just think ESPN missed a ton of opportunity here with these games. By the way, a couple other games that I thought of, Florida and Miami, they open in football. Why are they not playing in basketball? We got Florida and Virginia. We got we got Florida and Virginia and Miami and Arkansas. I think Miami versus Florida would be good. It's kind of interesting. Like I said, they play in football, whatever. You get Mario Cristobal on the sidelines talking about why he doesn't know how to take a knee with the game on the line. You get the new Florida football coach because they're probably going to have a new football coach by then. There's plenty to talk about there. I would send Virginia to Tennessee. Listen, Virginia is not very fun to watch, but at least they're kind of a brand, if you will. By the way, I think NC State, Tennessee would be fun. They might be on the schedule already. The only point I'm trying to make is pretty straightforward, is that I do think that this event was kind of butchered. By the way, producer Matt's Auburn Tigers, you can find a spot for them. There's enough interesting teams in the ACC. By the way, how about this? Everyone's going to hate me for saying it. Auburn fans will. How about Auburn at Boston College? Bruce Pearl's from Boston. He used to be the Boston College Eagles mascot. Send him up there, relive it, find video of it, whatever. I got to do everything for everybody. By the way, remember this too. How about this? SMU, Cal, and Stanford are now in the ACC. Because of the overlap, there's only 16 SEC schools, 18 ACC schools. SMU is not part of this event. Have SMU play Texas. Have SMU play Texas A&M. Have SMU play Oklahoma. I got to do everything for everybody. I got enough jobs as it is. I got to do everything. I got to be an ESPN schedule maker right now. What are we even doing? Take a quick swig of water here. Don't worry, I'm not going to break or anything like that. But really quickly, there was certainly another very interesting story that I saw on Thursday that I do think is at least worth, a quick mention. I'm not going to spend an hour and a half on it here. I'm not going to spend 25, 30 minutes on it. But you see what's going on in the Big 12. So the Big 12, like we said to lead the show, like we said with Dan Hurley, the Big 12 is, we're entering a new era in college sports, period. As I said to lead the show, most of the concentration of power and money is in the SEC and the Big 10. And so every other conference is scrambling, trying to figure out how to create income, how to create revenue, how to get their schools closer to the SEC and the Big 10. Well, I bring it up because on Thursday, we found out that, how about this? The Big 12 is thinking about selling naming rights to its own conference. In other words, let me explain this, okay? So Kentucky football, they play at Kroger Field. Kroger's obviously named after the supermarket chain, whatever. Kroger Field pays a lot of money to have Kroger on the side of the stadium. I think it's Kroger Commonwealth Stadium, whatever, you get the point. UConn basketball, they play at the Excel Center. There is some, tech company that pays an awful lot of money to have their name on the side of that building. So you have those naming opportunities in stadiums. What I am saying, and this is not like the Onion, I'm making this up. The Big 12 is thinking about selling its name to a league, and apparently Brett McMurphy is the first one that I saw with any type of real, tangible deal that may be done. According to Brett McMurphy, this was about, I don't know, probably noon Eastern time. He said Big 12 in discussions with Allstate on naming rights deal to change the league's name. Sources told Action Network. Deal could be worth between $30 to $50 million a year, with naming possibilities including the Big All-State Conference or the All-State 12 Conference, to which I have two things to say. One, on the one hand, I'm all about the Benjamins, baby. What did Randy Moss once say? It's straight cash, homie. I get it. But two, college sports is just completely off the rails. And when I think about this, those are the two things that really stand out to me. One, I sort of get it. Listen, I am a businessman. I own my own business, Aaron Torres Media. It's hard for me to get too fired up about a league and a conference trying to make a business decision, okay? We do everything here. We brand everything on this show. We used to have the Bet US frames we used to have the Bet US logo on our frames. There's a good chance that's coming back. We used to have the Bracket Fanatics logo on our frames. We used to have a Betfred logo behind me. And by the way, if you want your company's logo right here, we'll take money. It'll be a lot less than 30 to 50 million a year. I can promise you that much. And we are probably going to have somebody there soon, so you better act quick. So on the one hand, I totally get it. Business decision. And Brett Yormark, listen, I can't criticize this when I've been so complimentary of Brett Yormark, because I think Brett Yormark, to his credit, is pushing college sports and pushing the Big 12 into the 21st century and beyond. We've talked about all his initiatives. We've talked about how he came from Rock Nation. We've talked about all the things that he's done to create interest and excitement. They're going to be playing basketball games and football games, or they were planning on playing them in Mexico City. Now, I think there's some logistical issues that got that pushed back, but he wants to play in Mexico City. He wants to expand the footprint. He's talked about, remember they had the coaches clinic at Rucker Park in New York. He had Shaq DJing outside the Big 12 tournament. He had something weird at the Big 12 championship this year in Arlington. The guy is a businessman. He's creative. He's interesting. I respect it. And it's hard for me to get too fired up if it's going to give you $50 million a year divided by 16 teams. I'm not great at math, but what is that? An extra $4 or $5 million a year in your coffers for whatever in this world where every dollar matters, NIL, coaches' salaries, students, whatever. So I get that. On the other hand, let me also say this. What are we even doing in college sports anymore? Like, it's crazy to me. I was talking to my buddy David Nuno, Texags Radio, on Thursday morning when the Dennis Dodd story broke that they're trying to get private equity for the Big 12. In other words, Deloitte or something, I don't know, would come in and give them $1 billion to distribute or whatever. Now, that one I don't really understand, because I don't understand how the Big 12 would ever pay it back. But at the same time, it's just so funny to me. It's so funny because, honestly, like, I'm just, sometimes it blows, like, I talk about this every day, so in some ways it doesn't surprise me, but in some ways it does, like how crazy college sports has changed and evolved in a very short amount of time. Because you think about 3 years ago, literally 3 calendar years ago, NIL wasn't even in place. I think it went in July 1, 2021. We didn't even have NIL. Like if a player wanted to sign autographs for $5 a piece, you couldn't do it. And from there, we have gone from standard NIL to collectives to revenue sharing, and now private equity, now renaming selling your conference's name, branding rights. I mean, what are we even talking about? So like, as an example, is it just going to be like on ESPN or whatever, or Fox, go from the Big Ten game of the week to the All-State, the All-State, plus 22 game of the week? Like, it's just, it all sounds weird. Now, the one thing I will say, I was thinking about all the great, names, and I was looking at the comments because I was kind of curious. I was like, I wonder if anybody's going to come up with anything clever. It sounds like All-State is the leader in the clubhouse, but at the same time, I saw some good stuff with Buc-ee's, could potentially be the Buc-ee's League, Quick Trip. We're talking about really Southwest, Midwest companies. The first one that I thought of, who should make the phone call and pay up? Greg Sankey. The Big 12 presented by the Southeastern Conference has a nice little ring to it. How funny would that be if Greg Sankey was like, yeah, we took over college sports, now we're taking over your league too. We're like England back in the 1600s. We just show up and we plant our flag and you deal with it and you like it. So we'll see what happens. I'll be curious. Listen, this gets out today. Everybody has the same story at the same time. ESPN had it. Ross Dellinger from Yahoo had it. Brett McMurphy had it. This is going to happen. I don't know what's going to be called. I don't know who's going to be the affiliate that steps up and signs up and becomes the sponsor of the now formerly Big 12, but it's going to happen. And we are going to go, by the way, from again, the Fox Noon Big 10 kickoff to the All-State 22 game of the week. Producer Matt, before we get to Aaron Right, Aaron Wrong, do we have any questions? I have not looked at the chat. I don't know if everybody's just yelling at each other like usual. But if we have a question or two, let's get to it. Aaron, do you believe Amari Williams when he says that he was never going to decommit from Kentucky? So Amari Williams is the player from Kentucky. I'm not positive if he's actually enrolled yet. I saw something like a day or so ago that he was the only player that wasn't. But there was this weird story where Mark Pope had to fly up and he was in Philly, probably finishing up at Drexel. And Mark Pope had to fly to Philly because there was talk that he was going to be leaving. JC, I'll be honest. This is one I don't have a great answer to. My question is that if Mark Pope thought the need to fly up, there was probably something there. Now, I believe that happened after the NBA draft deadline. So my hunch is that somebody was trying to tamper. I think the thing that people forget is when you're talking about the transfer portal, you don't really sign a letter of intent. There's nothing binding you to schools. Now, I think once you enroll, then the clock ticks. In other words, that if I'm Aaron Torres and I enroll at UConn, I can't then transfer without having to sit out until the semester mark, in December. But if it's May and I'm just verbally committed and I had the Joe Tipton graphic, until I show up, there's nothing there that makes me committed to the school. So I think there was something there. Do I think it was ever going to actually happen? I don't know. But it's kind of like the Dan Hurley thing. I don't think if Mark Pope felt the need to go up there, I don't think it was necessarily 0%, but I don't necessarily think it was anything that Kentucky fans really had to worry about. And now the big thing is that, again, I had read somewhere that there was a possibility that he might not show up. So you do wonder if there was some truth to it. You got anything else? By the way, I forgot my water. My throat is just on fire right now. Nothing else. Last call for questions. I know it's a little bit of a slower show today. Matt Short says, I knew he wasn't going to Lakers. Spo better than Hurley. I mean, yeah, in the NBA, probably. But how many national championships has Spo won? Spo's never even been to a Final Four. What are we even talking about? All right, I'll tell you what. I will tell you what. This is what we're going to do. So we are going to bring back what was once America's favorite podcast segment. Now, we have not done this in a while. Just feels like every Friday show, there's been news, there's been something to react to. It's been a full show. But what we traditionally do during football season and really during everything other than like March Madness when we're on air on Friday nights, we wrap every week with what I call America's favorite podcast segment, where Aaron was right, where Aaron was wrong, where I give you my best and worst takes of the week. Quick backstory, where Aaron was right, where Aaron was wrong. Did steal this from my buddy Colin Cowherd. Colin does every single week, where Colin was right, where Colin was wrong. And I decided to bring this to the Aaron Torres pod for really two simple reasons. One, it's a very fun segment, but the real reason that we brought this to the Aaron Torres pod is for a very, 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 very simple reason. It is because over the course, as you all know, of a week, a month, a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, nobody loves giving out more hot sports takes than your boy Torres. Torres said this. Torres told you that you should have listened to Torres. Well, just one problem. I get a lot of stuff wrong quite regularly as well, as you also know. And so we do where Aaron was right, where Aaron was wrong every single Friday, highlighting my best takes of the week, but also my worst ones. And because we have not done Aaron right, Aaron wrong in a long time, boy, oh boy, oh boy, do we have a lot to talk about. So let's get to it where Aaron was right. So where I was right, listen, the big one, it's obvious. We talked about it to lead the show. We don't have to spend too much time on it. Dan Hurley, UConn Huskies, Los Angeles Lakers. Listen, we talked about it, but I said from the beginning, I said he is not going to be a Los Angeles Laker. It's for all of the reasons that we discussed, but also some of the reasons that we didn't discuss off the top. I just never bought that a guy that is all about team, culture, accountability, actually wanted to coach LeBron James. Or how about this? Remember that interview that he did with JJ Redick, Dan Hurley, where he said, we don't just recruit players, we recruit parents as well. We don't want parents showing up to practice if their son didn't play the night before. So you're going to go to LA, coach LeBron, draft Bronny, and LeBron's going to be at practice with you when you're trying to coach his son. It never made sense. It never passed the smell test to me. Listen, I'm not naive. As I said to lead the show, there is going to be a time where Dan Hurley gets a NBA offer that he very seriously considers. This was not it. This was never it. I nailed it from the beginning. I never really wavered. Where Aaron was right, Dan Hurley ain't going anywhere. Where Aaron was wrong. So I said I never really wavered. You know the only time that I wavered during the whole Dan Hurley saga? It was in like the last 10 minutes when Dan Hurley's wife, Andrea, showed up to the facility right before he made the announcement. Because to me, I saw everybody on social media like, well, of course she's going to show up. She wouldn't show up to say goodbye. I'm like, actually, that's the only reason she would show up. Hey, thanks for the memories. We appreciate you guys coming. We're going to Hollywood. But at the same time, and I also was like, the reason I thought it was like, there's no reason for her to show up. And with no disrespect intended at all, I don't do wives just normally show up to Monday practices? Of course not. And so the only moment, it was so funny, from Thursday morning when I first saw the story, I'm talking to people, UConn fans are hitting me up, Torres, how worried are you? I'm not worried. It's not happening. Don't worry. The final 15 minutes, I was like, oh my God, he's really going to leave. I can't believe it. I was dead wrong. My mentions are going to be hell. Thankfully, I was wrong. Thankfully, he's staying. That was where Aaron was wrong. Where Aaron was right. So listen, the moment this started, I said, this is all a ploy. JJ Redick is ultimately going to be the head coach of the Lakers. Why do I bring it up? Well, we saw the Woj report on Thursday morning. Guess who has emerged as the front runner? It's JJ Redick. Listen, JJ Redick has always been the guy. Shams put it out 2 days before the Woj report. Then Woj tried to claim, oh no, Dan Hurley has been the favorite forever. No, he hasn't. Because if Dan Hurley was the favorite, they wouldn't have waited 5 weeks to talk to him. By the way, if JJ Redick wasn't the favorite, when he was asked about the Lakers job, he wouldn't have said, I'll address my future after the NBA Finals. If there was nothing to address, then he wouldn't have said anything. Listen, JJ Redick has always been the guy, and JJ Redick's going to get this job. It has nothing to do with anything. I still think, listen, by the way, that low ball offer that the Lakers gave Dan Hurley, I think that was kind of their way of saying, we'd love to have you, but we already kind of have our guy, and we can't give you that offer that you can't say no to. And so I've said from the beginning, I think there was kind of an understanding. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Dan Hurley gets his extension. The Lakers get to say they had a real search. And now JJ Redick is the guy. But it is funny. Woj all of a sudden. It's amazing. A week ago, oh, no. Dan Hurley is the guy. A day after his biggest rival said it was JJ Redick. Now all of a sudden, Woj, incredibly, all of a sudden, JJ Redick has emerged. I've trusted Shams on the beginning of this. I still do. Where Aaron was wrong. So I'll be honest. I don't know if I've ever missed a story as big as Caitlin Clark. Because when Caitlin Clark was at Iowa, I just wasn't into it. I just said, like, look, this is a cool moment in time. She's setting records. We all know her because she played in the Final Four last year against LSU. But once she gets the WNBA, nobody is going to care. Well, fast forward, everybody cares, maybe more so. Now, I think it's interesting when you talk about Caitlin Clark. What I think is interesting is that I don't even think people are, they are more interested in WNBA. Attendance is up specifically for her games. Ratings are up specifically for her games. But I think most of the interest is actually from the narrative around Caitlin Clark. Like, I don't find myself more into watching games, but I do find that every person that I talk to that works in sports or knows sports has an opinion on how Caitlin Clark is actually being treated. Are the players too tough on her? Is this rookie hazing? Is it fair? Is it not fair? Like, if these girls weren't going after her and clubbing her and fouling her hard, then, like, I don't think people are interested. But because, obviously, look, you know, there's a racial dynamic. She's a white girl. There's a sexuality dynamic that people are keep talking about. I just think because of the way people are talking about it, people are now interested in Caitlin Clark. But I'll tell you, I thought it was going to die down after the WNBA started. It has not. And I think with no NBA, I hate to say it, I think it's only going to continue. Where Aaron was right. So one of my great early takes when I got into the take business, 2017 NBA draft. That was the big Markelle Fultz draft. Markelle Fultz, Lonzo Ball, they were going 1 and 2 all year. And I went on Chris Broussard's podcast. And Chris is still a good friend of mine. Love Chris. And he said to me, who's the best player in this draft? It's Markelle Fultz, right? And I said, no, Jason Tatum's the guy that I would like. And so fast forward, I think Markelle Fultz is still in the NBA, but he's been up and down. Lonzo Ball's been hurt. Jason Tatum has emerged into a bona fide star. Now, I know he has been great in the NBA Finals. I get it. But at the same time, let's also call a spade here as well, is that he is a star. He is going to lead a team to the NBA championship. Credit to him, credit to me, because all along I said, this is the best guy in this draft. Don't draft Markelle Fultz. By the way, if you remember, the Celtics had the first pick. They traded back, knowing the 76ers wanted Markelle Fultz, knowing the Lakers couldn't pass on Lonzo Ball. They get him at number 3. Great move. Where Aaron was wrong. So if you remember, about 30 seconds ago, I said, I don't know if I've ever whiffed on a story bigger than Caitlin Clark. One that's pretty darn close was Anthony Edwards. So when Anthony Edwards came out, it was that weird 2020 draft. College season sort of gets cut short, although his season was already over at Georgia. And everyone's like, he's the number 1 pick. And I said, I don't really know. Georgia kind of stunk. And if you remember, he did that weird interview right before the draft where he's like, yeah, I don't even really like basketball that much. Football is kind of my favorite sport. And I was like, football is your favorite sport? You're not even into basketball. I could never draft this guy number 1. I said I would draft Melo number 1, Melo Ball, but I was dead wrong. Anthony Edwards is an emerging star. I cannot believe how good he is. I cannot believe how fun that he is to watch. And let me take it a step further. I think he's actually going to go to another level over the next year. He's going to go to the Olympics. He's going to train with Steph. He's going to train with LeBron. He's going to train with KD. And he is going to see, like, to be that next level dude, this is the work that KD puts in every day. This is the work that LeBron puts in every day. I'm so fired up for Anthony Edwards. I cannot believe how wrong I was on this. Where Aaron was right. So if you remember, that Joey Chestnut story came out on Tuesday, that he was banned from the hot dog eating competition. So there's got to be something else here. I said, he's not only is he a cash cow, he's literally professional eating's only cash cow. Nobody knows. I can't name a second professional eater that's currently eating hot dogs in this Nathan's hot dog eating contest. Maybe because Joey Chestnut's won 16 in a row or whatever it is. Well, I bring it up because did you see the story on Wednesday? Joey Chestnut is hosting his own hot dog eating contest with his old rival, Kobayashi. Okay, this is like, I'm sure there's like a WWE reference, not really my thing, but I bring it up because this is awesome. These were the two best guys atop their game. Kobayashi kind of stepped aside. Now, listen, I'll say this. If you've never seen, there's an ESPN 30 for 30 on their rivalry, and it gets kind of dark because when Joey Chestnut emerged, they not only kind of shoved Kobayashi aside, they kind of like made him into a villain. But because he wasn't from America and because he didn't really understand like American culture and customs, he went to a dark place. And so I bring it up because I'm glad they're getting back together. I'm glad that it's going to be televised. And let me say this. I don't watch the Nathan's hot dog eating contest. One, because we know Joey Chestnut's going to win every year. But two, because I find the whole thing sort of repulsive. But I will watch when those two get together for that hot dog eating contest in a made-for-TV event on Netflix. Finally, where Aaron was wrong, let me just say this. We're recording here Thursday night. Game 4 of the NBA Finals is Friday. Feels like the Celtics are going to win probably on Friday in 4, maybe in 5. I didn't see this coming. I was the guy all along that said, well, they're good, but the East is down. They didn't play Milwaukee. They're Milwaukee was banged up. They didn't play the Knicks. They played Indiana. They played the Miami Heat. How good are they really? Well, as it turns out, they're really good. We talked about Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. How about Drew Holiday coming in and immediately having an impact? Congrats to the Boston Celtics. Game 4 is on Friday. Game 5, I believe, is Father's Day Sunday. I suspect by the time we do the next Aaron Torres pod, we will have ourselves an NBA champion. All right. Do think it is time for me to get out of here on a Friday. And I'll tell you this. If you're not subscribed to the Aaron Torres pod, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure you're subscribed. Also, make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead, give us a quick 5 stars. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, all that good stuff. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, please make sure to do so. Put on those notifications as well. And oh, by the way, I think that's really about it. I think there was one more thing that I want to say. Oh, probably no show Sunday night for Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all the great fathers out there. We'll be back probably Monday around the same time. Time for me to go. Appreciate your support. We'll be back soon. Shout out to Torrent Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to soon-to-be Lakers head coach JJ Redick. You F-head. Unblock me, bro. Be back Monday. New episode. Aaron Torres.